Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Reducing the Risk, Part 3. I am Alicia Nottingham, Assistant Library Conservator at the Preservation and Conservation Laboratory, Heritage Library Division, NALIS. We ask that you keep your cameras off and your mics muted. You are invited to type your questions into the chat for the question and answer segment at the end of this webinar. Let me introduce our facilitator, Danielle Fraser. Since 2009, Danielle has been the library conservator and head of the PSC lab. Danielle holds a Master's of Science in Information Studies and a Certificate of Advanced Studies in Conservation of Library and Archival Materials from the University of Texas at Austin. She was a 2008 Conservation Fellow of the Library of Congress, Washington, D.C. She has been a member of the American Institute for Conservation and the Library Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Danielle enjoyed presenting papers at the annual meetings of the regional associations, including Acaril and Corral. So I know she's looking forward to presenting today. Over to you, Danielle.
Thank you, Alicia. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Before we get into our topic, let me introduce our organization. The National Library and Information System Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, NALIS, is the country's coordinator of all library and information services. Beyond the Heritage Library, there are over 25 public libraries, 3 libraries in correctional institutions, libraries in secondary and primary schools, and special libraries in several government agencies, all administered by NALIS. Please visit our website, www.nalis.gov.tt, for more information about our services. We'll post the link in the chat of this webinar. One of NALIS's key responsibilities is to promote and preserve national heritage information. Though the National Library has a comprehensive collection of paper-based items and electronic audiovisual media, there is particular emphasis on materials with national and Caribbean origin, focus, and authorship. The Heritage Library Division, located on the 2nd floor of the National Library Building, Port of Spain, Trinidad, helps NALIS fulfill the goal of acquiring, promoting, and preserving national heritage information. I invite you to follow the Heritage Library Division on Facebook at NALIS HLDTT. See the link in the chat. Special collections acquired or donated to the Heritage Library Division consist of mainly traditional library items created by or of interest to a significant person or organization of Trinidad and Tobago. One would not be surprised to find within these collections books, newspapers, pamphlets, letters, photographs, film and audio recordings, and memorabilia, like the typewriter you see here. The Preservation and Conservation Laboratory is responsible for ensuring the overall longevity of library materials with attention to the Heritage Library Division and its collection of historical importance. The PSC Lab, which was officially commissioned in 2013, helps NALIS fulfill its role as the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, or IFLA, Preservation and Conservation Regional Center for the English-speaking Caribbean. Additionally, this arm of the Heritage Library Division advises public and private organizations on the care of their collections and artifacts. The PAC Lab has been serving the preservation and conservation needs of clients through fumigation, freeze drying, conservation treatments, collection repair, bindery services, disaster recovery, technical assistance, and preservation training. We miss carrying out our preservation clinics, tours, and training sessions in person. However, we are happy that technology allowed us to continue this mission through our preservation webinar series. In case you missed any of our previous webinars, the link to the YouTube playlist on the NALIS channel is posted in the chat. As we think of protecting our library and archival collections, We began part 1 of this series on reducing the risk with risk assessment. Then part 2 looked at strategies for risk mitigation. We'll take a quick look back at key aspects of part 1 and 2. In this part 3, we end the series as we take a look at an introduction to disaster planning for library and archival collections. We will explore key elements of a disaster plan and look at a few planning tools, which I think will be useful for your library or archive. Finally, we'll carry out this helpful talk-through exercise, the tabletop planning scenario. So let's begin. Part 1 looked at risk assessment. When assessing risk to our library and archival collections, we should seek to answer these questions. First, we ask what might happen. Which hazard or agent of deterioration has the likelihood of affecting or damaging the collection? Remember, we can use 10 agents of deterioration as a good starting point for library and archival collections. Next, we ask, how likely is that? What is the chance or possibility of it actually happening? What will be the frequency of this occurrence? Then we ask, what will be the consequences? What is the expected impact on collections? How severe would the harm be? These questions form the framework for most of the risk assessment tools which work well for library and archival collections. In part 2, we looked at risk mitigation. The ICROM Risk Management Guide suggested this table to help us think about all possible options in a systematic way. If you use the matrix of stages of control, that is avoid, block, detect, respond, and recover, against the layers of control, that's location or region, site, building, room, cabinet or storage, collection item, policy, and the procedure, you may end up with many different options for mitigating the risk against each agent of deterioration acting on your collection. Of course, it's not always possible to fill each spot for each of the 10 agents of deterioration, but this matrix works well as a tool for widening the way we think of risk mitigation. Prioritizing or deciding on which risk mitigation option to execute could vary depending on the following considerations. How much does it reduce the risk? How much does it cost? Does it reduce more than one risk? Is it feasible? Is it sustainable? Does it create new risk to your collections? Now, disaster planning is just one phase of disaster management. It starts with assessing risk by determining our institutions and collections vulnerabilities. We explored this in part 1. The next phase includes taking measures to prevent, protect our collections through risk mitigation to help minimize damage. And this was the focus of part 2 of this series. In the third phase of the disaster management, we prepare and plan. And should a disaster occur, we put steps in place to first respond with suitable actions. And that's the fourth phase. This includes stabilizing collections, assessing damage, and conducting initial triage. The last phase is recovery, as we salvage and rehabilitate collection materials. However, for this webinar, we will focus on disaster planning. Remember, risk assessment and mitigation can help prevent a disaster or reduce the impact of an occurrence. However, it is an effective plan. Prepare in advance of a disaster, which results in a calm and reasoned approach to the emergency. This can significantly help to minimize losses. Remember, a disaster is a sudden calamitous event that makes it impossible for you to operate normally. Losses from disasters can be fast and catastrophic. But not every emergency need become a disaster. The difference is often preparation. So don't overlook the value of planning your response to emergencies and disasters. The main goal of a disaster plan is to provide preparedness information and give instructions for response. There are several resources available to guide in developing and maintaining a disaster plan or an emergency plan. And we've included a few in our webinar resources document. Use the link in the chat to download it. Here I highlight key elements of a disaster plan for cultural collections. In general, a disaster plan should include the following: information about the disaster team. It should include as well detailed actions to be carried out when a disaster occurs. And these should be organized by the type of the disaster as well as the materials affected. It should also include a priority list of materials to be salvaged, as well as a list of emergency tools and supplies, training plans for staff, and plans for reviewing and revising the disaster plan must also be included. An essential part of an effective response is a good disaster response team. The members work in advance of a disaster so that the team is ready to swing into action when a disaster occurs. Each member has a particular role to play. The team leader manages any recovery and salvage operation and coordinates recovery activities. After consulting with other members of the team leader determines the level of response based on established priorities and the scope of the disaster. The team leader may also handle publicity and public relations, such as requesting volunteers, etc. The recovery specialist stays current on recovery procedures by reading the literature and attending conferences and meetings. With the knowledge gained through these experiences, the recovery specialist tailors recovery procedures for the library or the archive. By training staff and volunteers, the recovery specialist ensures that appropriate recovery and salvage procedures are followed. The crew manager assembles and coordinates work crews of staff and volunteers. In addition, the crew manager controls the flow of materials into and out of the recovery center. Because breaks, food, and refreshments can help improve the morale of work crews, the crew manager arranges for these amenities. The supplies and transportation manager, working with the recovery specialist, determines the supplies that the institution needs to keep on hand for immediate response in the event of a disaster. In addition, the supplies and transportation manager arranges transportation of materials that need to be sent off-site. The recorder maintains the list of priorities for recovery. This list is also included in the copies of the disaster response plan. The recorder tracks damaged materials sent for rehabilitation and updates the collection's holding records when materials are discarded. The photographer helps document a disaster and subsequent recovery effort by photographing and videotaping the damage to the building, collections, and furniture. It is important that the photographer keeps a careful record of the date and time of the photos and the videos. When a damaged area is declared safe to enter, the photographer should photograph or video record an area before any cleanup work is done, as well as after an area is cleaned. The communications manager operates the communications center and handles incoming and outgoing calls and messages. And finally, the keeper of the disaster plan, working with other members of the team, coordinates all activities concerning the disaster plan. As the principal writer of the disaster plan, the keeper revises pages or sections as needed. The master copy of the disaster response plan is held by the keeper. In the course of writing a disaster response plan, we may decide that we want to or we need other team members. It is often recommended that members of the planning team are also members of the response team, as they are keenly aware of issues following that risk assessment phase. Positions should be created and duties assigned as needed. Now, the emergency contact information included in your disaster plan should list not only the disaster team, but also the following: emergency first responders, such as police, fire, and ambulance services. It should include local representatives of disaster management agencies, like for Trinidad and Tobago, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, or ODPM, or the Tobago Emergency Management Agency, or TEMA, or for the region, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, or SEDEMA. Also, you should have on contact staff and volunteers, as well as vendors for supplies, equipment, and other services. Funders and the insurance companies should also be included in your contact list. To respond effectively to a disaster, your library or archive should have on hand some essential supplies. These can mean the difference between a minor emergency and extensive damage. These should be secured to avoid them being used up for everyday operations. However, keys to the kit must be easily accessible at all times, even during outside hours. The location of store disaster supplies should be noted in your disaster plan. The supplies and transport manager is the person in charge of the disaster response kit and will issue them to the work crews. Your disaster plan should also include response instructions. These instructions detail safety measures for both people and collections, including evacuation and shelter-in-place procedures. Clear first steps for the person who discovers the situation and subsequent assessment actions should be included. These persons may need to quickly assess the location following an event to take stock of the initial situation. Also, using a floor plan of your institution can help you identify the parts of your collections based on collection priorities, financial values, and vulnerabilities. Your disaster plan should include decisions on how the team communicates among members and with the press and public. The Pocket Response resources included in the webinar resources has a great section on communication. It includes checklists for crisis communication, which could be handy for smaller institutions without an official public relations or communications department. Decide on your policy for updating, distributing, and practicing the plan. Include decisions regarding when the plan is updated and who receives a copy of the plan. Ideally, printed copies should be available in case of widespread power outages, and they should be stored off-site in the event of the location being inaccessible after the disaster. A plan remains a wish list until it is practiced. Therefore, schedule regular practice sessions for the disaster team and other staff members. It may be difficult to perform a full-scale disaster drill, so using tabletop exercises can help. We'll try one of these exercises a little later on. The task of pulling together and distributing all the information needed for a disaster plan can seem very daunting, even for small institutions. The following tools can help streamline that process. D-Plan is a free online tool which provides a fill-in-the-blank template for entering disaster planning information about your organization. It was prepared by Northeast Document Conservation Center, or NEDCC, and the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, and is available for nonprofit organizations. To complete your D plan, you can enter information into the following sections. Institutional information, which includes personnel, disaster planning team, as well as collections. The section on prevention includes assessing risk, building systems, and preventative maintenance. The response and recovery section includes disaster response team, information technology, salvage priorities, evacuation and emergency procedures. Supplies and services section includes information on emergency services, suppliers, and funds. It also includes scope and goals, information about staff training, as well as distribution, review, and updating of the plan. There's also an option to upload attachment like floor plans. And after making your D plan complete, you will be reminded via email to update your plan in 6 months. The D plan will soon be upgraded with 21st century usability for more features. Let's take a quick look at the demo on the website. Permit me to change screens. Now, here is the D plan website, dplan.org. And after giving you some information, there's the opportunity for you to become a new user by registering, or you can try out the demo. And that's exactly what we're going to do now. So we are going to try out the demo. So once you click on the demonstration account, it tells you how to go about logging into the demo. And I've actually done that. And here we are inside of the D-Plan demonstration account. So they've filled out parts of it with some fake information just for you to get a sense of how you can go about using it. Now let's start with institutional information, the information that is about your institution itself. So the name of the institution, the address is included as well. The person who has to be the administrator of the plan, and who would be a contact person, someone who can be reminded about the updating of the plans, etc. Now, when we include staff and key personnel, it includes both their phone as well as email information, address information, etc. And you can actually add additional persons as well as make changes to all of the information here. I like that the D plan has a disaster planning team information. So it shares here that you can actually choose persons and assign them different roles. So who will be responsible for gathering information on all of the collections, for updating the staffing list, for being the one to assess the risk as they relate to the collections, for devising opening and closing procedures, preventative maintenance checklists, salvage priorities, etc. So all of the different duties as it relates to the plan itself can be divided up to multiple people. Now, this is a section that allows you to check and indicate the type of materials that are held by that library or archive. So you can choose whether you have archival materials, do you have art on paper, audio recordings, books, digital media, manuscripts, microfilm, photographs. If we have objects, that would include furniture and sculpture. All of these things can be included. So once you completed the institutional information, you can actually go into the section that deals with prevention. And I'm just going to touch on this very quickly, but we've covered a lot of this when we looked at risk mitigation. So here, risk mitigation and assessment. So here you are assessing just how affected your institution can be as it relates to all of these different hazards. So they have hurricanes, here they have thunderstorms, and it allows you to put in some notes about that particular hazard. So for instance, this is based for people in Illinois. So here they say Illinois averages around 50 days of thunderstorm activities a year. So they would have gathered that information from a meteorological source. And they state here that thunderstorms are most likely in spring and summer. So those are the times that we can look out for that particular hazard. I love that it also has all the various natural hazards, all the way to wildfires. And you're also able to include your own other type of hazards as well. Now, just in case you may not be aware as to what that particular hazard is about, they actually, it's not working. They actually should have a tell me more information that comes up with a definition as to what that particular hazard is about. So I'm going to just quickly touch on construction and renovation info. Sometimes we might be undergoing some construction. When will it begin? When will it end? The architect, the general contractor, the project manager, all of these things are included for you to add. Now, there are several preventative maintenance measures that are included in the plan. And they're just looking at things that relate to cleaning restrooms, for instance, maintaining the stacks, if you have to deal with vacuuming the carpets, etc. And they're DLA tasks versus weekly or even annual tasks. Some of the annual tasks might be checking on the insurance, checking on the septic system, looking at your fire suppression system, making sure that your fire extinguishers are properly inspected, etc. So they've included quite a range of things here. Now, I just want to quickly stop on closing procedures, because a lot of times it's actually when people take some additional steps and just simply closing the doors, that can allow for us to be aware of anything that might be going on at the location. So it's just a checklist to remind staff, whoever is responsible for closing up, that they ought to be sure that the doors to your vault, for instance, are properly closed, and we can choose that one. Make sure that the windows are locked, ensure that the security system is armed, be sure that things are plugged in and operating properly, unplugging all small appliances, etc. And you can include your own different levels of activities as well. And likewise, when opening, that's usually a good time, particularly on Monday after the weekend, to check for various things as you open, to be sure that there are no problems that would have occurred while the building was closed. So for instance, checking that there are no unusual off-hours activities, checking for leaks, smells, different sounds, if there's any temperature change, making sure that the lights are working, that the security system disarmed without a problem, etc. Now, when we think of disaster response team, here they have listed out, similar to the list that I shared with you, as to who would be the person. So from this, you can choose a person name, you can have different backups, etc., as it relates to these different roles that have to be taken for your disaster response team. And as it relates to salvage priorities, it's listing here that institutional records, the administrative aspect, are things that you would want to save. And of course, for each record, it allows you to indicate a number of priority. So we can probably list this as number 1 priority, the type of records that we may have, and perhaps payroll would be an important one for us to save. So we're saving the payroll information, and we're putting that it is in the accounts department. Accounts department of 3rd floor. Right? And so we put that as a number 1 priority. Like if we have to save anything, that's one of the things that we need to save, right? Of course, as it relates to our collections, we may have different collection priorities. So for instance, here they have in the example that the archives and special collections have a #1 priority, and that they're located, the name of the collections would be the Rare Books, Maps, and the Shakespeare collection. That is in the library building, C1 building on the 2nd floor. So give the exact location as to where those collections are as it relates to salvaging, right? And of course, other collections can be named, and you can even add further collections as well. There's also a space for you to include a map along with color coding. So you can include building plans in this section here and make a decision as to how you're color coding. So if it's top priority, they've indicated here, they've suggested that red is for priority 1, yellow for priority 2, and then you can use blue for priority 3. So right away, you have a map that is able to show you via color code the areas that are of top priority. Now that's in relation to response and recovery, but as it relates to supplies and services, there's a section here to allow you to put down your communication with emergency services. So remember I said that you should have contact information for the fire department, the police department, etc. So here you may have your inspection dates, who may have been the officer carrying that out, or who would be the key contact person for that, as well as all of the information as it relates to dealing with fire. Police department, similarly, we have here a contact person for someone from the police department who could be our liaison in that particular location. And then this is where we can put in that information as it relates to emergency management agencies. So SEDEMA's contact information would probably go here. And then we can have local emergency management agencies. So for Trinidad and Tobago, we can put ODPM, and it will be good for us to have a relationship with someone there and to be able to include their contact information and their name, title, phone number, etc. We may also put, if we're in Tobago, TEMA information in this section as well. And also put different bits of information. When last we may have had a review, information about procedures and interactions with that organization. But any of the emergency services, so this is calling them and getting in contact with them to send fire, police, ambulance, your in-house security. You may be having to alert the security guards who are on patrol on your compound. If you have a monitoring system, an alarm, you would want to have that contact information to be able to get onto them very quickly. And of course, any other information. They've even included poison information as well. Now, it's important sometimes to be able to give a contact information in case of an emergency to facilities. So we spoke of the emergency security aspects, but then facilities, maintenance, departments are also important. So we may want to have on hand information for an electrician, information for a plumber, perhaps even a locksmith, maybe a carpenter, someone who's the exterminator, someone to help with computer emergencies. We may have to get legal advice very quickly. We may have to have someone inspect the building, so an architect or a builder or an engineer. If we do have gas or oil or any of those combustibles, the electric company, the water company as well as our telephone company. So it's important. And if you have elevators, that's true. If you have elevators as well, it's important to be able to have those contact information before a disaster takes place. A lot of times what we end up having is that we fall into a disaster and then we're frantically searching. So if our disaster plan actually has that information put in, we can then go to the plan and quickly search for that name and that contact information to search when it's needed, right? And quite a number of other options are available. I like that they have listed emergency supplies. So basically the things that you have stored in-house that should be clearly labeled as disaster kit. Remember, we indicated that they should not get involved in the daily use. So this should not be the mop that you use for mopping the floors on a regular basis. There should be something that's held and reserved just for when that emergency takes place. So I do enjoy the fact that they've listed quite an extensive way the number of items that are needed following typical emergencies. So aprons, book trucks, buckets, clipboards, and they have each and every one listed along with a location as to where they are. And of course, this will be good for the person who is responsible for ensuring that all of the supplies are maintained, right? And to ensure that they are regularly inventoried and that they are noted as to where they are and the numbers that we have in stock, right? They even have some additional supplies, things that might be necessary for more large-scale disasters. So for instance, hard hats, rubber boots, maybe we might need tarpaulins, for instance, or perhaps even walkie-talkies if there's a full-scale power outage, etc. Some of those things are listed here. And of course, remember I said it's important to know about funding. It's good to have this information beforehand decided so that you're not at the point of an emergency trying to figure out where do we get the funding, who do we contact, who is the one to release the funds, etc. So the in-house funding allows you here to list persons who are able to disburse those funds. And if there's an institutional credit card, the person who's authorized for using it, etc., who can authorize large purchases as need be, and who can give you information about the institutional charge account. So all of that can be saved in this section. And then, of course, as we're looking at services, you can list and have on file the experienced volunteers and workers that you may have available. So for instance, here's an example of someone who's a student, where they're located, a telephone number for contacting them. So these are people who might be available either within the same institution that you're located, or perhaps if it's such a large scale disaster, you may have to get help externally. So those who have some experience working with the library and archival materials. So all of their information can be included here. I also like that it allows you to add some additional information. Here you have, is a person trained in CPR or first aid, and you can click it to indicate if that is a yes or no. And an area for experienced versus general volunteers. So those who may not have that salvage experience, but can be readily trained and they are available for assisting can be listed here as well. I mentioned to you that a disaster plan should include scope as well as goals. It's important that people understand just what is included in this disaster plan, that they're not opening it up looking for something that would more than likely not be covered. I like that D plan gives you a sample of a disaster plan statement. It says this disaster plan addresses, and it explicitly states all of what this disaster plan is about and what it covers. You also have a location where you can note the staff training. So staff who would be trained over a period of time, if they have any sort of training as it relates to disaster planning, etc., could be included and noted here. You can also have the disaster response team as well as general staff also included as well. So they have here some suggested areas of training, whether you're going to train everyone in basic preventative measures, that you're going to train everyone in reviewing the evacuation procedures with respect to the operation of the security system, the climate control, fire detection, fire suppression, how to operate fire extinguishers, the person who would be responsible for updating the plans. All of these things can be included here and noted in these areas as to how frequently they would occur and who would be responsible for ensuring that that training takes place. Now, if you do have people who are officially trained in first aid and CPR, that's something that can be noted here. So the date that they received the training, the type of training that they would have received, all of those things can actually be included here. And I like the fact that there's information as it relates to the distribution. So you can actually put in information as to who has a copy and where that copy is located, as well as reviewing and updating and who would be responsible for each particular part of that plan. So who has to review the insurance information, for example, the volunteer list, who has to take on the staff training, and you can choose persons as they are available for carrying that out. And of course, here's an area that allows you to include that attachment that I mentioned, where you can include the floor plan as it relates to the priority areas of your collections. So I hope you get the chance to check out dplan.org. I think as a free tool that's widely available, if you log in and create an account, you're able to actually tailor make a plan for your organization. It allows you to access the plan digitally by logging on again, as well as you can actually download the entire plan and print it out and have a hard copy of it. So it takes away from that guessing, and you're not starting with just a blank piece of paper. This is one that actually has it organized in such a systematic way that allows you to really do a good job of that. Now, this is another tool that I like to mention. It's a customizable, double-sided, legal-size sheet of paper that's designed to carry information on your disaster plan with you in person. So it's like a trimmed down, smaller version of things as it relates to your disaster plan. So let's take a look at it on the website. Right. So we are. So the Council of State Archives has freely provided this template. They've allowed for it, though first created for archives and record management organizations, they've actually come up with variation and adaptations for other agencies, as well as a generic version that can be filled out. I also like the fact that they do have it in 2 foreign languages, Spanish and Portuguese. Now let's take a look at the document itself. It has, like I said, it's a double-sided legal size document. So on side A has all of the information as it relates to communication. Now remember, you can actually download a Word document of it, and you'll be able to fill in and personalize all of the information as it relates to your institution. So we can include institutional contacts, information as it relates to the organizational head, directors, the managers, etc. And then all of the first responders, number for the local or the nearby police department, the fire department, ambulance services, etc. We can also include the information as it relates to the disaster team so that they can be immediately contacted. There's also information about the utilities, whether it's electric, telephone, water, etc. All of that information can be quickly looked at using this template. You can also include emergency service providers. So those who may be able to help you with exterminating or disaster recovery, providing a refrigerated truck to keep items cool, etc. And then of course it has a number of regional and local numbers that of course we can personalize it to our situation for wherever we are located. Now on side B, it has a number of list of actions that you would take as it relates to the response. So should it be that someone comes across it, they can actually take this out and take a look at it. It's able to be folded up and stored within, it's folded up down to the size of a credit card and stored either in a pocket or perhaps even in the ID card holder that you might have for work. It allows you to take a quick look at what's going on with that particular disaster. So for instance, let's say here, the person gets a quick rundown that you should ensure that the hazards are all cleared before entry, assess and document what might be damaged, what are the areas that are affected, maintain security, stabilize the environment, identify and gather emergency locations. There's space here to allow you to actually include the locations as to where that information would be, that emergency supplies would be located. And then of course, there's several things about maintaining the channels of communication. And again, this comes as a Word document, which allows you to personalize it for your particular institution and how your channels of communication would go on. And even with respect to providing emergency services, what should be some of the steps and the different action that you would take as it relates to responding to that particular disaster. Now, I do hope that you take a look at this document and see that perhaps at least this document of listing contact information for your staff, disaster teams, first responders, as well as the list of collection, recovery, response, and activities would be a good place for starting if it is that you don't have a full-blown disaster plan. At least this is a bit of information that each staff member can actually move with and have on them enable in their ability to respond immediately to that disaster. Now, here we come to what I think of as one of the very interesting parts of this session that we're going to have here today. I would like us to work on this tabletop planning scenario. So it's a scenario put together by the Library of Congress. And they state that because full-scale emergency response rehearsals are impractical for most institutions, these realistic scenarios are intended to be the basis for tabletop or talk-through exercises to cross-check assumptions and response strategies. So here's our scenario. I'm going to just read it out. We have a water damage situation outside of working hours. So at 11 p.m. on Saturday, facility staff have alerted the emergency response coordinator that water has penetrated a closed collection space after hours. A bathroom sink on the top floor of the building was plugged and the faucet was opened. By the time the problem was recognized, the water had flowed through ceilings into 6 spaces on 2 floors. Water has dissolved and carried components from building materials, but it is not believed to be toxic or otherwise contaminated. About 200 ranges of storage furniture have been affected. These include bound volumes, document boxes, and photographs. About 25% of materials is soaked. The balance of the affected collection ranges from damp to wet at the edges. right? So there's some key things that are going on here. This occurred 11 p.m. on Saturday. From the top floor down, 2 floors have been affected. They indicated that a total of 200 ranges of storage furniture, right? So I think a range would be just one unit. So this is a wide span of area. But the thing is that the damage varies. So we have about 25% of them being completely soaked and probably dripping, and the rest of them ranging from either just being damp to just simply being wet along the edges, right? So they've actually suggested a number of questions, sample questions to help discuss. Now, what they've stated is that your team should get together, plan for at least an hour or two to sit and discuss these scenarios and work out as much as possible, just in discussion. However, for our purposes, I'm just going to run through a couple of questions. So we're not going to spend an hour or two discussing this scenario, but I think it's good to just get a sense of how this could work. Should anyone have any suggestions or respond to any of my questions, please feel free to add them to the chat. So, first thing to consider, are the collections at risk, the ones that are not affected by the temperature that's in the storage space or by the relative humidity? Now, this would have occurred on Saturday. In Trinidad and Tobago, we had quite a lot of rain, let's say, for instance. In the past few days, we're in the middle of the rainy season, so our relative humidity is relatively high, higher than it is for most parts of the year. Temperature, even though the storage areas, those should be controlled in a better way by their air handling unit. So do you think our collections, the ones that are not directly affected, do you think that they are put at risk? And what risk might be created because of the changes that might go on with respect to temperature or relative humidity? Well, first off, there may now be the risk of mold forming in the collection because the relative humidity has been raised. Mold has to have those ideal situation of warmer temperatures, higher humidity, still moving air, moisture. All of those things combined together create the perfect conditions for mold growth to occur. So that's one of the major risks. Now, let's say that we have carpeted floors, or actually, I'm going to go realistic. The situation that we have at the National Library building is that we have concrete floors below, which are covered with a laminated floor, which looks like wood, but it's actually just a laminate. So is there a particular consideration that we should think of in looking at this? Remember, they stated that the water has actually dissolved and carried the components of the building material with it. So it's not toxic or contaminated, but are there any considerations for thinking of the type of floor, the type of flooring that we would have in this collection that's affected? Definitely, I think for sure you would want to consider that it's possible that yes, the water has dissolved some of the components, the glues that are used with the laminate. And so we may even have the laminate becoming detached or separated from the concrete below, etc. So that may be something to consider, though glue dissolved in water may not be toxic to people, but is it possible that that could actually affect our collections themselves? It is a possibility. Now, one of the things for walking into the space, do we see standing water, or has the flooring completely absorbed the water, or has all of the water that remains been entirely absorbed in the collections or the storage furniture? Now, if we have standing water, let's look at that example. If we have pools of water around, this now needs us to carry out a different set of activities. However, if the flooring has absorbed the water, then drying that area is going to take on a different plan. Pooled water would probably mean mops and wet dry vacuums, etc. But if the flooring has absorbed the water, we may need to look at a different way of drying out the space and getting that water out of the flooring. Now, here's another question. What would what supplies or equipment will this response require? What will be some of the things that we would need to have in order to respond to this particular disaster? Anyone with a guess? Just going to the chat. You can feel free to add your response to the chat if you wish. But what are some of the supplies or equipment that we would need? So I mentioned one of it just now, a wet dry vac is something that would come in handy here. We would need to have mops, things for drying, materials for drying, tissue, etc. We would want to have things for removing the moisture from the air and ensuring that that moisture doesn't just sit. So having fans are also handy. Fans can actually help move the moisture particles out of the space. We would want to include even a dehumidifier, right? A dehumidifier would help draw the water that's out of the space and condense that water into liquid and allow you to take that liquid away. So it helps to dry out the air that's within the space. And yes, I see A. Walker, yes, you recommended dehumidifier and fans. There are also supplies that we would need as it relates to drying and relocating the collections that are affected. So we would need to have enough trolleys, etc., dry materials in order to help absorb some of that moisture and making a decision on what do we do. Now, what do you think are some of the challenges that would be expected in applying our response plan to this particular circumstance? What are some of the challenges that we may face? Now, remember, this happened at 11 p.m. on a Saturday. So you may face staffing challenges, for instance. You may face some problems with getting immediate responses from vendors and suppliers, given that the following day is a Sunday, right? You may face some difficulties for operating on the weekend as well, right? And what do you think would be the very first thing that you would have to do, or perhaps the second, or even the third thing? And that's the thing about this tabletop planning scenario, that you and your disaster team are able to really put yourself into the scenario and work out what are some of the possibilities that could go on there. What are some of the things that we may have to do first, we may have to do second, we may have to do third. And so you are actually using the disaster plan that you've drafted to now exercise it in a scenario and see, does your disaster plan stand up to what the scenario says here and what it actually requires? I love that and again, this link is included, this document from the Library of Congress is included in our webinar resources. And I like the fact that it has the information as it relates to several different disasters, not just this water damage one, but even as it relates to power outage, flooding, civil unrest, earthquakes. Those are different scenarios that are included along with questions to help your team sort of massage and work your disaster plan around the different scenarios. So I hope that you can think of this as something very useful for your team to use. So thank you so very much for attending our webinar. I want you to feel free to put your questions or your chat or anything like that. Any comments, etc. You can put them in the chat, or you can feel free to email us as well. Remember, I encourage you to please download the list of resources for mitigating, for dealing with disasters for your collections. And you will receive today a brief survey, and your feedback is going to be important to us, and we look forward to your responses. Now, I want to give a special thank you to everyone who attended multiple webinars or viewed our recordings in the Preservation Webinar Series playlist on the NALIS YouTube channel. All of your support means so very much to us, and we thank you for being a part of this journey with us.